Defying an 11th hour bid by the White House to block her appearance, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, is still testifying to Congress right now. After nearly 9 hours, she is delivering a damning account of the administration's handling of foreign policy. Yovanovitch served in Ukraine for almost 3 years, and her abrupt removal back in May was among the earliest red flags in the Trump-Ukraine scandal, coming 2 months before Trump's now infamous call with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Speaking today of her firing, Yovanovitch said that she was told, quote, there had been a concerted campaign against me and that the department had been under pressure from the president to remove me since the summer of 2018. She denied multiple unsubstantiated allegations that have been leveled against her, calling them fictitious. And she said she was, quote, incredulous that the U.S. government chose to remove an ambassador based, as best as I can tell, on unfounded and false claims by people with clearly questionable motives. Her scathing rebuke of those who targeted her comes as we learn the scope of the lobbying campaign that Rudy Giuliani waged to get her fired, an effort he mounted with his two business associates, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, both of whom were arrested this week. According to the Wall Street Journal, Giuliani wanted her fired in part because he believed, quote, Yovanovitch had been an obstacle to efforts to push Ukraine to investigate Mr. Biden. The Associated Press also reveals that she was eventually removed after insisting that Giuliani's requests to Ukrainian officials for investigations be relayed through official channels. That said, Yovanovitch told Congress that, quote, I do not know Mr. Giuliani's motives for attacking me, but she warned of a, quote, unfortunate alliance between Ukrainians who continue to operate within a corrupt system and Americans who either did not understand that corrupt system or who may have chosen for their own purposes to ignore it. For more, I am joined now by Congressman Denny Heck, a Democrat from Washington State who serves on the House Intelligence Committee and who took part in today's deposition, Jeff Bennett, a White House correspondent for NBC News, Greg Miller, a national security correspondent for the Washington Post, and Susan Page, Washington bureau chief for USA Today. Thanks to all of you for being here. Well, Congressman, we are talking about this hearing today that you have been a part of for the past 8 hours or so. So let me just begin with you and ask you what you heard today from Yovanovitch, from the former ambassador. Does it in any way advance the case, in your view, for impeaching Donald Trump? And if so, how?
Well, Steve, first of all, we're not talking about any of the specifics which the ambassador shared with us today. But 8.5 hours later, let me say this. Let me say three things. Number one, this woman oozes integrity. Number two, if anybody wants a beat at all on her character and on her values, they ought to read the opening statement which she shared with us and is now in the public domain. It speaks eloquently to this woman's commitment to this country, her patriotism, and her dedication to her profession. And finally, number three, this nation owes Ambassador Yovanovitch a big, big apology for what happened to her.
Well, what is your, I know you don't want to talk about the hearing, but I guess what is your sense of what happened to her? She's saying she was fired for not for cause, for the cause being that Giuliani potentially was out to get her.
Correct.
Does that, I guess what I'm asking you beyond that, though, is when I say your case for impeachment, does that affect your view on it? Does that make a stronger case in your view?
Look, Steve, fast forward, what, a week or 10 days after the record of the call between President Trump and President Zelensky came out, there were an awful lot of people asking us, well, what more do you need to know? What more is there to know than this? And think about what's happened in the 10 or so days since that was released. We had the Volcker text. We had the indictments of these two associates of Rudy Giuliani. Now we have 4 national security officials who it has learned also were ringing the alarm bell. It seems as though every 2 to 3 days we learn something new that deepens and gives breadth and depth, frankly, to the story and the narrative about, frankly, how complex this conspiracy, if you will, this effort, if you will, was to get Ambassador Yovanovitch out of Kyiv for all the wrong reasons.
Jeff Bennett, let me go to you. The picture being painted here of what was going on potentially inside the administration. Giuliani, not officially a member of the administration, but the president's personal lawyer, though, playing this outsized role when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to trying to get this investigation started. Giuliani agitating the president to get rid of the ambassador. The president ultimately having her recalled. What is the bigger picture that's emerging here?
And I think one way to think about this, Steve, is that as Democrats make the public case for impeachment, the work they're doing right now is they're piecing together the how it was that President Trump leaned on those Ukrainian leaders to, in effect, do his dirty work, to do his political bidding. That's the argument. That's the thesis of the argument that Democrats are making. And so what they heard today from Ambassador Yovanovitch, according to the public's the prepared statement that she gave, the opening statement that a colleague and I obtained, what she says is that her ouster is a direct result of the pressure that President Trump put on folks at the State Department. Why did they do that? Because the ambassador was one of the people who was concerned about the influence campaign that Rudy Giuliani was running. She makes the point that there is a standard operating procedure to elevate American interests abroad, but that Rudy Giuliani wasn't doing that. He was operating in his own personal interest and at the behest of President Trump and working with those now two indicted associates. And so that's the point that she makes. And she says very clearly that at one point she met with the number 2 person at the State Department. And that person told her, "You've done nothing wrong, but take the next flight home. You've lost the confidence of President Trump." And then from there, she does a top to bottom rebuke. This is according to her opening statement. Top to bottom rebuke of the Pompeo State Department that she now says is all these pressures, political pressures put on otherwise apolitical career folks. And she describes a hollowing out of the State Department that is inherently dangerous and it does not work at all in America's interests, Steve.
Well, last week, the president seemed to allude to Giuliani's lobbying campaign to have Yovanovitch removed when he confirmed he had been hearing, quote, very bad things about her.
Why did you recall the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine? Was there a problem? Why did you recall her?
I heard very bad things about her. And I don't know if I recalled her or somebody recalled her, but I heard very, very bad things about her for a long period of time. Not good.
So, Greg, what we're learning today from her statement, from what she's saying about Rudy Giuliani and his sort of campaign there to get her out, when Trump says he heard very bad things, are we to assume he heard that from Rudy Giuliani?
Yeah, I think that's obvious. I mean, he's hearing things from Rudy Giuliani, and Rudy Giuliani is a conduit for things that he is hearing from officials or former officials in Ukraine who are not pleased with the ambassador's position trying to fight corruption in that country. I mean, Trump not only says he heard bad things about her, but if you go back to the rough transcript of his call with the leader of Ukraine, he tells the president of Ukraine that bad things are going to happen to this ambassador. I mean, this all fits together, right? People who are not on board with this effort to get political dirt from Ukraine are moved out of the way or are marginalized.
Susan Page, we mentioned at the top as well that she appeared today despite the administration essentially trying to tell her not to. She defied the administration, appeared anyway. What do you make of that?
You know, we may find out, I'm sure we will find out later, what she's saying in this extraordinary hearing. I think it's still going on 9 hours later. But the fact of her appearance before the committee is as important as whatever she tells them, because she is, as you say, defying the administration. The administration has tried to keep witnesses from testifying before various congressional oversight committees. Once she was subpoenaed, she said she would comply with the subpoena. We have another example next week, the EU ambassador, who is a Trump appointee, saying he will testify before the committees. That is a powerful statement on her part. And by the way, a brave thing for her to do, really puts at risk her lifetime career.
Yeah, Congressman, let me ask you about that. Do you think just the significance of that the White House saying don't show up and she shows up anyway, does that portend anything for some of the other witnesses you folks have, your committee or other committees have been hoping to hear from, who the administration's indicated they don't want talking?
I hope so, and I think so, Steve. But let's remember, first we had one whistleblower, then we had two whistleblowers, then we had the Inspector General, I think, also engaging in an act of bravery by coming forward and refusing to accept the acting director of National Intelligence's directive that he not inform us of what had happened. And then we had the four national security officials who have now indicated that they were ringing the alarm bell. There are cracks in the wall, and the walls are closing in on the president.
Well, in her testimony today as well, Ambassador Yovanovitch defended career foreign officers. She said this, quote, "Today we see the State Department attacked and hollowed out from within. State Department leadership with Congress needs to take action now to defend this great institution." She warned that, quote, "harm will come when private interests circumvent professional diplomats for their own gain." Hours before her testimony, the Washington Post reported that a senior advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, that's Michael McKinley, the senior advisor's name, quote, resigned his position amid rising dissatisfaction and plummeting morale within the State Department. According to a person familiar with the situation, quote, McKinley was disappointed in the secretary's lack of public support for diplomats who have been named in the Ukraine controversy. And it comes as Secretary Pompeo refuses to answer questions about Yovanovitch's removal.
Did you do enough to defend the ambassador privately and publicly against the smear campaign that was being waged against her? And will you speak to that now?
Well, ma'am, you have some of your facts wrong.
Did you support the ambassador being recalled months before her tenure was up?
Supported every mission that the State Department's been engaged in and will continue to do that.
So, Greg, the Ambassador Yovanovitch, says when she was recalled, it wasn't Pompeo who did it. It was one of his deputies. What do you make of Pompeo and his role in this?
I mean, I think that Pompeo, we are learning more. He was on the call. It took him 2 weeks to admit that he was on the call that Trump had with Zelensky. He won't answer questions about when he was in Poland, whether he met with Rudy Giuliani. He can't really point to any evidence that he stood up for this ambassador in Ukraine. It's no wonder that department appears to be really rattled and that morale is really plunging there. And if you look at the other chess pieces that moved around under his leadership, you move out Ambassador Yovanovitch, and in comes a millionaire donor to the Trump campaign to seize control of that relationship with Ukraine, Ambassador Sondland, who's supposed to testify next week. I mean, these are all moves designed to meet the president's sort of political objectives, not America's foreign policy objectives.
Jeff, I'm curious what you're hearing from the White House. The administration didn't want this testimony to happen today. It happened anyway. Were they surprised by what came out? Were they shocked that this happened? Were they bracing for it in some way? What's been the reaction inside the administration?
As to whether or not the ambassador would show up. And it was an open question, apparently, to some White House officials, too, who learned of her arrival just as we were when she showed up on the House side of the U.S. Capitol here. The White House put out some talking points that they, again, mistakenly sent to Democratic offices. And so we were able to read them. And I'll tell you, a lot of the talking points all spoke to process. Why it is that Adam Schiff, they say, would bring up the ambassador here without a State Department counsel. She might say things that are privileged, and that he's going to run roughshod over a longstanding, tradition and protocol. Nothing that the White House has said really has spoken to the underlying argument, and that's that the president, so goes the Democratic argument, risked the national security and undermined the integrity of our elections by inviting foreign interference into an election. You don't see any sort of rebuttal in the talking points that the White House put out today, Steve.
Susan, I'm curious, too, the politics of this week. Keep wondering reaction from the president's own party, from Republicans. Obviously, there was the initial revelation of the call itself, the transcript that came out. Now you're at a point where you've got details like this about Giuliani coming in from the former ambassador, the possibility of more coming out. Are Republicans, do they feel that they were ready for this? Do they feel surprised, caught off guard by this? Is this changing the equation at all when it comes to their reaction?
Well, I think they feel they're getting very little guidance from the White House about what a unified response should be. You see a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill mostly trying to jump into the bushes when they see a reporter approaching with a question. You may have seen yesterday's clips with Cory Gardner, the Republican senator from Colorado, 7 times dodging the question about whether this would be proper behavior for the president. You don't see many Republicans criticizing the president. Mitt Romney would be the prime example of the exception to that rule. But you also don't see them saying, hey, the president, they don't either say the president did nothing wrong addressing the substance of the complaint, or it's outrageous to think the president would do something like that. Of course he wouldn't. You don't hear that kind of defense from Republicans. I think they are still sticking, by and large, with the president, but you see a lot of nervousness among Republicans, especially Republicans who represent swing states and swing districts, have suburban voters, those college-educated voters who are the most dismayed by what they see with the president.
And Congressman, you heard from Yovanovitch today. What is next?
Well, we're going to hopefully talk to a number of other people. We have tentatively scheduled Fiona Hill, who was at the National Security Council. I hope that that is able to actually be realized, because I would be looking forward to that as well. Look, Steve, the earlier conversation is important, frankly, to broaden a little bit. Not only, as Ambassador Yovanovitch is asserting, has the State Department been hollowed out, and that great institution that has served America's national security interest and diplomatic interest for so long is being compromised and degraded. But think about what he did over the weekend by turning his back on the Kurds and, frankly, unlocking and opening the door for Turkey to invade Syria and attack the Kurds. In the future, our allies are going to look at us and say, how can we trust you? You are either acting in your own political self-interest, not the interest of your nation and your values, or we can't trust your word because you're going to change it on a whim, as the president did last weekend. These things matter. This is not just a matter of the scandal of the president clearly having violated the law that says he cannot solicit aid from a foreign nation, but our institutions are being damaged and our relations are being damaged. That's why this is so very important.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.